And welcome everyone to South Huron Special Council meeting this evening on Wednesday, February 11th. And welcome those who are in the gallery this evening. We also welcome our staff who are here to give us the best information and advice so we can make the best decisions on behalf of the residents of South Huron. And welcome our members of council that are here. Councillor Neeb is not with us this evening, but he is online. And Councillor Neeb, if you have a comment to make and I don't catch it, just feel free to speak up. Also, if you have cell phones, please make sure they are off or on mute. And at this point, our video that shows town hall is not working, but we have people working on it right now to see if they can get it rectified. So at that point, we will call this meeting to order and we'll go to item number 2, please.
The South Huron Council approves the agenda as presented.
And a mover, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor, second by Councillor McLeod-Haggett. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? And that carries with 7. Thank you. Disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Are there any disclosures at this time from members of council? Not seeing any. Move on to our presentation. We welcome Nancy to provide information for us. Thank you very much and welcome, Nancy. Take your time.
Thanks. Good afternoon or early evening. I believe we're going through the water and wastewater rate study first, and someone has the presentation to share.
Our staff will get that up for you.
Sorry, just one moment, please.
So we do have some technical problems right now. We're going to take a 5-minute recess. So just we'll come back. We'll start this meeting now, and we're back in session. So Councillor Neeb, can you still hear me okay? Okay, thank you very much. Please proceed, Nancy, whenever you're ready.
Great. Good evening, Mayor Finch, members of council, staff, and the public that are here. We are going to walk through the water and wastewater rate study that is before you to consider new water and wastewater rates, as well as the financial plan this evening. So if you can go to the next slide, just going to give you a brief introduction of all of that. Look at what your current rates that were in 2025 when we undertook the study were. Talk about the projected growth that we've assumed into the rate analysis, as well as go over the capital expenditures and financing sources that we've assumed will take place. Talk about the operating budget. We do have to forecast that out as well over the full 10-year forecast, and then get into where the new calculated rates have come out. And then briefly talk about the water financial plan, which is also required for your water license renewal. Next slide. So as noted, there is two components, and you will see in your agenda package two different reports. One is the rate study, and one is the formal financial plan that is required under Ontario Regulation 45307. It forms one of the 5 components of what you need to submit to the ministry to have your water license updated every 5 years. So it really is translating the rate study into an accounting document. And we'll talk about some of the differences that you see in there. It's very confusing for people who are not accountants or financial people to understand, but it is fully based on your rate study. And that's really what you're concerned with, is projecting into the future what you need your rates to be. It is something that is also informing and is very entwined with your development charge study when it comes to the water and wastewater services that will be recovered potentially through those development charges that we'll talk about later this evening. Next slide. As noted, right now, your current rates, there are quarterly base charges that are in place that vary for non-residential customers by the meter size. For residential, there is a base rate for most residential units. Apartments are at a reduced rate, but it's on a per unit basis. So the more units on a property, the more revenue you're getting in that. And then there's, of course, volumetric rates that are based on the actual volumes that people utilize, and which varies for every household and business. And those are currently for any volumes up to 10,000 cubic meters per month, set at $1.85 for water and $1.81. Now, these were last year's rates that continued into this year until these new rates get passed. There are also some wastewater customers who aren't on the water service, and for them, they pay a flat rate and will continue to unless they get connected to the water system at some point, and then they can switch over to those base charges. In addition to those quarterly base charges and volume rates, there are in Exeter and Stephen another similar type of base charge, but it's specifically related to the Exeter Hensel debt that was issued years ago and recovering that. And you will see going forward, similar charges will be introduced, but updated based on the remaining balance of what is to be paid off in the debt charges. And so they're actually going to be going down going forward. Next slide. So we have embraced with the growth or with the rates, we have based the population and additional unit households in the next 10 years based on the Huron County population and housing projection study that was completed in March of 2024 with some adjustments, obviously, to the base because we were looking at 2025. It does align with your background study, the development charge background study, with that growth, as well as other refinements we have talked about with staff. Now, you will notice if you look into the details of the rate study, we project additional residential units into what we're assuming for new volumes and new customers. We are conservative when we're undertaking a rate study, and we don't add in additional non-residential customers, although they are projected to come. And that is because it's very difficult, based on the size of a property or the size of a building, to know whether a new user will be a very large water user or a very small water user. If you think of a logistics warehouse, it may be very large in size, but other than, any kitchen or washroom facilities utilized by the employees, they're not a big water user, where a smaller building that could be a restaurant, a school, could be a very large water user. So it's conservative not to add those customers in. Any volumes or base charge revenue you get from them as they come on in the system will give you a little bit of a surplus that can help mitigate fluctuations in costs in future years and or be able to put a little bit more money away for future asset replacement. So it's just a bit of a conservative approach that we take on that, because otherwise, if we project too much in the way of customers and volumes from that, your systems could run deficits, and that's the last thing we want to set your rates up to do is run a deficit in those services. Next slide really shows that the majority of the customers, well, all of the new customers for residential that we're assuming coming on in the forecast are in that first block category for the volume rates. So none of them will be tipping over that 10,000 cubic meters per month. If there was any, of course, you would charge the rates that are applicable to them. And again, it would give you a little bit more of a surplus or a buffer to mitigate other cost increases that may be experienced. So we are anticipating that the volume in your customers will grow over really what is from 2025 up to 2036, about 86,450 additional cubic meters annually that you would have to, or that you'd be billing to customers. So moving from 972,000 and change cubic meters currently that are billed out to just over 1 million cubic meters. On the wastewater side, next slide, similar, we have assumed additional units and additional volumes for the flows in the wastewater based on the same assumptions for the water. Next slide. When we look at the capital needs in what is 2025 uninflated values, because that is how you budget, there was just under $3 million in your 2025 budget for water services and about $8.5 million in 2025 for your wastewater system. Going forward, with all of the capital that's needed for asset replacement as well as growth in the next 10 years that we're projecting, you will be looking at having to fund around $32.1 million of water service capital and almost $39 million worth of wastewater capital. Now, we do recognize that the water and wastewater rate study is a living document. Actual take-up of growth will be different than what's projected in any given year. It may be higher or lower. Staff, through their annual budget process, will look at every capital project that's coming up, and if it's asset renewal and it's still functioning well, they may push it out a couple more years. On the flip side, there may be other things in the forecast that if they're starting to see problems with, they may bring those capital programs forward. And of course, anything related to growth. If growth was to stop, then you don't need to add a lot of those growth projects, and they'd be pushed out to ensure that they align with the timing of when the growth is going to be there. Now, one thing with the growth that you do have to keep in mind, though, is very difficult sometimes to project exactly when those projects have to go forward. You have to make sure that your water and wastewater capacity is there to be able to issue the permits. So these services do quite often need front-ending financing to be put in place by the municipality and or by developers with any thing you can coordinate with them to ensure that you're not building too soon, but the services are there in place so that the growth can continue. You'd hate to put a stop on growth in any area of the municipality just because the infrastructure isn't in place to be able to issue those permits. So that's a little bit more of a game that has to be watched very closely with where the growth is happening, how much is happening, and when the infrastructure needs to be put in place. Because again, a lot of this infrastructure takes more than 6 months or a year to put in place. Some of these projects are multi-year projects, and so watching very closely the timing is very, very important. But it is something that is a living document, and you will see through future annual budget processes the timing of some of the projects moving sooner or later. Next slide. As I mentioned, right now, most municipalities, they only budget for a year to 3 years of operating costs. We do have to project out over the 10-year forecast to ensure that the rates are embracing that. We have increased some of those costs for inflation. Well, all of the costs for inflation, some of them slightly different than others, but we have also embraced putting funds into reserves to mitigate future fluctuations in rates and or to mitigate having to issue debt as much as possible into the future, especially when you have large asset management or life cycle renewal projects that are coming due. Next slide. As I mentioned, the Exeter Hensel pipeline debt that charges that have been in place, you've been collecting for them, you've been paying the debt charges, and with what is left outstanding and the properties that will benefit from that, there is updated rates, and you see that they will be, as I mentioned, going down for this component of the charge. The majority of those charges are paid for through the Exeter charges. There is a smaller component that the customers in Stephen also pay for. So there is differences in the change that's happening in those reductions. And those result in the overall bill being a little bit differently for Exeter customers versus the Stephen customers. The debt is anticipated to be paid off in 2034, which is before this 10-year forecast period ends. So the last couple years of this forecast, those charges will be completely gone and won't be imposed any longer. Next slide. When we did look at a couple of different scenarios with staff and yourselves over the last few months, we always wanted to make sure that we looked at inflated values to ensure that you're setting rates not in 2025 uninflated dollars, but in those future inflated dollars. So both the capital and operating costs have had inflation impacts built into it. And you'll see that going forward, the difference in what I showed you a couple of slides ago and what the inflated values are is a program for water that is almost $41 million and for wastewater is over $51 million. There is for, and sorry, there's a typo there. We haven't assumed any new debt on the water side. We have assumed additional debt on the wastewater side of about 11.18 million. In addition to that, there was some debt identified in 2025 that has yet to be issued yet, but when it does, that will equal about $13 million worth of debentures financing that is required and will need to be paid off in annual installments in future years, and all of that has been embraced in the rates. Next slide. To give you an example of what a sample bill will be for a residential customer that uses about 150 cubic meters a year. Currently in 2025, their bill in Exeter for both water and wastewater would have been $1,825. In Stephen, it would have been $1,563. And you can see that we are, with the changes to the base charges, those Exeter Hensel debt, and the volume rates, there's an overall rate increase to the total annual bill in 2026 for Exeter at 1%, and then almost 4% every year thereafter until you get to the last couple years, which seems a little odd, but that's because of the Exeter Hensel debt expiring. Similarly for Stephen, 4% increase this year and then almost 5% every year thereafter. So that in 2036, the same customer that paid $1,825 last year would be paying $2,615 by the end of the forecast. And in Stephen, similar, they'd be then on par and everyone would be paying the same once that debt charge is paid off and removed. Next slide. To give you an idea of what and where your charges actually compare to other municipalities and what they impose around you, this survey is based on the most recent January 1st rates that municipalities have in place, with some of the municipalities higher than you, others lower. The proposed rates for yourself are in the hatched areas, and then your current rates in Stephen and Exeter are shown in the lighter colors with the gray arrows below them. So you see that Stephen overall is moving up almost in line with where the Exeter rates will be. And then, of course, depending on the municipality, I want to point out there was one municipality on here that just, a neighbor of yours here on East, that just passed last week, moving from different rates for each system to combined rates. So there's some major changes in depending on the area you're in there, plus or minus, and this reflects those most recent rates as well. Next slide. And actually go to. So just to touch on that water financial plan again, that's needed for your water licensing renewal. It is required every 5 years, as I mentioned. It does have to include, sorry, next slide, a minimum of 6 years. Because your rate study has gone out to 2036, we have included right out to 2036 for that financial plan as well. It is more than's needed. You currently are mandated for providing that for water services. You are not for wastewater services until the province sees fit to put that in as a mandated charge. There's no need to do it. It is a regulation that falls under the Safe Drinking Water Act for those who are interested. Next slide. Again, the province recognizes that because your rates and the services and what you need to do are a living document that changes annually, they realize that the financial plan is also a living document. And you are not required every year to redo that and resubmit it, but they do recognize that there can be quite a bit change within 5 years. So you are required to do it at least once every 5 years. And we've been working with municipalities since the regulation was put in place years ago, have come up with a methodology, and we've had no issues from the ministry concerned about anything that we do in those financial plans. They've all passed through without any concerns. There are additional information that's required to be embraced in those calculations that aren't in the rate study, and I'll go through that a little bit more, but it has to do with amortization is the major change, and we'll talk about that. The financial plan, once passed, does have to be provided to anyone who requests it without charge, and it should be on your municipal website for the next 5 years until you pass a new one. And then you do have to advertise that it's available once it's passed. Okay. Next slide. What it all means, the intent of the legislation is really to ensure it came out of, for those of us who remember the Walkerton crisis, and really to make sure that the province is, satisfied that municipalities are planning for asset replacement of their system and ensuring that testing is happening and all the operating requirements, the things that need to happen are happening to keep our water systems safe so that we don't have any other issues like that in the future. And it does require them to be put into what is called PSAB, or Public Service Accounting Board 3150 format, which is, if you think about a private company, like a balance sheet and operating statement of cash flow. So uh, an accounting document versus what we look at going forward in your rate study is more on a cash basis or financed basis going forward. So the next slide really kind of highlights the differences between the two studies. Where your rate study or budget is done on that cash basis, a full accrual accounting basis is what we do the financial plan on. The capital requirements in your budget and forecast may include non-tangible capital asset costs such as studies, an EA, the water wastewater rate study itself. You can capitalize those, but they don't result in an actual asset that's put in place. So when we translate it into an accounting document, those get reassigned, those costs, as an operating cost. So slightly different. So if you're looking, you won't see the exact same numbers in both documents for capital and operating, and that's part of why. As well, as I mentioned, one of the biggest differences is in an accounting document, you look at your assets based on the historical costs that you paid, could be 40, 50, 60 years ago when it was put in place. And of course, you depreciate that or write it down to the point where when it gets to its useful life, the value of that asset is really zero. Well, of course, you cannot replace it at zero or even at that historical cost. So as much as we have to show that for accounting purposes, in your rate study and your budget, that is ignored, and we are looking into future costs with inflation to look at actual replacement costs and making sure that's what's built into your rates. And that is the big thing between the two documents that really throws things off if you're trying to follow numbers. But that is why we have to do it. As well, any debt, of course, in your rate study, we want to make sure that the rate revenue can pay for both the principal and interest costs. In accounting terms, interest becomes an annual expense, and the debt or principal payment towards the debt is a debt reduction. So again, just a different way of handling those costs. And then, of course, reserve transfers to reserves in your rates is seen as a capital related expense. In the accounting document, it's considered part of your accumulated surplus. And development charges we show as a reserve fund continuity in your rates, money coming in, money going out to pay for the growth related infrastructure. It's considered deferred revenue in the accounting document. So those sort of kind of align, tell you the differences between the two documents. Know that everything is in balance in your financial plan as well as your rate study. And that's really the biggest concern. And if you go to the next slide, it's a summary of the statement of operations and where you see differences between the rate study or budget and that full account accrual budget on the right. You can see where we've made some of those adjustments between the two different documents. And that's really the debits and credit adjustments in the middle two columns of numbers that you see there. And as you can see, everything is balanced. Your revenues and expenditures are balanced, and then all of your adjustments are balanced between each other as well. On the next slide, it's a summary of the statement of financial position. So really your assets, your liabilities, and then what in private terms are called owner's equity or your asset values. Again, all balanced. Changes between the two documents are summarized in those adjustment columns. Next slide. Really, next steps and recommendations. The rate studies have been put out to ensure that you have full cost recovery through that for all of the capital and operating costs. You can consider, those plans as well as the rates, understanding that you do relook at these every 5 years to update because of major changes that can happen in the system or with legislation. Quite often, there may be new rules put in place that require you to do more, whether it's capital or operating, and that's why every 5 years you'll be looking to update those. And then, of course, passing the financial plan is required. A resolution of passing that has to be submitted as well to the ministry with the plan itself. So you will need to attach that and then make it public and notify everyone that it's available. That's my presentation on the water and wastewater rates and the financial plan, and I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Yeah, great presentation. Thank you, Nancy, for that. Any questions from members of council at this time? Okay, Councillor, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Nancy. I guess there's some good news in this with the debt retirement for the Exeter Hensel pipeline coming to an end in this forecast. It's been a long time coming. So the thing that scares me, though, is basically our water rate forecast and our wastewater rate forecast are looking to double in the next 10 years. And based on the capital budgets that we have in the 10-year forecast. So my question is, there's a number of projects that are out in year 9, year 10. And so when you get that far out, whether they're there or whether they're in year 11, I'm not sure. I guess so if we're to move, say, $5 or $10 million and put it into year 11, just for what is the math that, how would that affect the rates? Like if you were to move, say, $10 million and move it to year 11 and not in this study, what would that do to the rates?
So through the mayor, it really depends on which projects you're moving. If they are just asset replacement, those costs could be moved out and may result in, instead of immediate capital being needed, additional transfers to the reserves for their eventual replacement, taking the place of actual funding. So you may not see a big reduction because you would still need to plan to replace them in year 11 or 12. If it's growth-related project, that's a bit different because it depends whether or not there's a replacement and upgrading. So there might be an asset replacement component to that, as well as a component that would be paid for through development charges. So moving those types of projects out would have a lower impact on anything for rates, but would also have to then be looked at as to whether or not that would constrain growth in an area as well if those projects aren't going forward. And that's where, again, when you're looking out to year 9 and 10, it is, the forecasting is based on what we know today, based on active plans that are out there, discussions staff have had with the development community as to when we think growth is going to happen, and works will have to be put in place for it. I mean, you could get a big amount of a grant as well. You just recently got an announcement for wastewater on grants. We did work that in already to the rates you're seeing. If you were successful getting more grants, that may actually have to pull some projects forward, like this most recent grant announcement did. To be able to utilize all that grant funding, we had to actually pull some of the projects that we had later in the forecast sooner, so that you can reduce what's needed from your own rates for that. So there's a lot of things that are very dependent. And to say that just moving one specific project or 10 million of a project, it depends on what the project is and how it's being funded. So it can swing one way or the other. But if it's asset replacement, keep in mind that you still have to put money away to eventually replace it. So instead of going as a transfer, to actually fund that capital project, it would probably be a transfer to reserve for the future next year or two replacement, and wouldn't really reduce the rates at all.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, yes, maybe you would be putting money into a reserve for it down the road. We already know we have an asset management deficit. We have an asset management plan. There's a deficit every year, so we're not necessarily putting money away in a reserve for some of those projects. I guess my biggest concern is the 10-year doubling right now. There's only one pocket the money comes out of. And so that's, I know it's an investment for down the road. But I just didn't know, it just seems gray to me when you got projects year 9, 10. Are they really going to happen in that 10 years? Because we've had some where they get pushed out a couple years because something else comes up that's more important that we need to do, sort of thing. So.
Yeah, and through the mayor, just a little bit further on that. Of course, when you're looking out that far, we're looking at average useful lives. And when you get closer to those years, that's where staff's looking at the actual projects and saying, are there issues? I mean, if it's not broke, why fix it? Just because we think an asset's going to have a 50-year life. Well, if it lasts 60 years, we're not going to replace it in 50. But projecting and knowing, like staff know quite a bit more about the projects that are happening in the next few years, going out 8, 9, 10 years. And that's why you update the rates every 5 years too, to relook at it, because then those projects that are in year 8, 9, 10 in this forecast will be in year 3, 4, 5 in the next one, 5 years out. And staff may have a better sense of how those projects are functioning and whether they can be pushed out to help keep the rates down, or whether they do need to move forward.
Thank you. Any other questions at this time before I go to the public? Councillor Oak, go ahead.
Yeah, Nancy, thank you, Mayor. Nancy, you mentioned that one of our neighbors has come out with some new rates. What kind of increases are they projecting for the next 10-year forecast in their situation?
I don't know the percentages right off the top of my head, but because they've now moved from individual rates per system to saying we're one municipality, we provide water, wastewater services, and to whoever we provide that to, we're going to charge everybody the same. Some systems, the charges will actually be going down right now and then be increasing over the forecast at a different rate, where others will be going up slightly now, but then their rate increases won't be as drastic in future years. I don't know the percentage off the top of my head. I've worked on about 6 of these studies in the last 2 weeks, and everyone's slightly different. I just wanted to point it out because from what we showed you back in December, if you looked at that survey compared to this one, you'd notice that Huron East is different and doesn't have all of these different areas. And that's because council, when presented with a couple scenarios, decided to go with a blended rate and treat everybody the same that gets the municipal service.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of council? Okay, not seeing, we go to the public then. Those that have listed themselves, Madam Clerk, do you have a list there?
I don't believe there's anyone online, but if there's anybody in the public who wanted to provide comment on this.
And this is regarding to our water, wastewater, not development charges at this time. Go ahead. Welcome, Don. And if you could just state your name and go from there.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'm Don Dijon, Trident Properties. I'm accompanied today with Jamie Cernsich from Magnus Homes and Ruben Smith with PHBA and some other members of PHBA in the audience. So thank you for allowing us to speak to the development charges session.
For water, wastewater. Water, wastewater discussion. Wait, the public meeting will be the development charges.
Okay,
There's two sheets that were on the desk there. One was
thank you.
for
We're
water.
doing two-stage here.
Yeah. So
Clear.
do everything with
So
water,
we're,
wastewater.
we're recognizing there's several items of percentage that are viewed with large increases in cost each annual period. And I wonder if that's, true representation of inflation costs, or, it's just something that it drives everything. When you have that much use, it's a driver. And some of the, to be careful with wastewater only, I just say that those percentages are a big skew in the dollars here. And I'll reserve my next comments for the next opportunity. Thank you.
And Nancy, do you want to answer that? We always have to acknowledge that our water and wastewater infrastructure is our largest and most important critical public asset we own too. So go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, through yourself, the capital inflation impacts that we have built into the water and wastewater rates are based on the development charge non-residential construction price index that is prescribed, so that it's in line with that DC study. And what that index looks at, it's Statistics Canada pulls that information together. It is not CPI, it's non-residential building construction price index. It really looks at the tender prices in the area and tracks what that inflation impact has been out there for both private and public tenders for construction jobs. And so what we've embedded in the future is looking at the average of that index that it's been, and it has been coming down. It was quite high. There's about 47% that it has increased over the last 5 years. So we, through the COVID years, saw a very high 9+% 1 year index in that. Again, representing what you're actually seeing coming in as tender prices when you go out to tender for some of these projects. But we did recognize that that index has been coming down. We're hoping it stays down and levels out a little bit more the way it did prior to COVID. But we have looked at embracing that index in the rate calculations so that we're staying consistent with recognizing that even when municipalities are going out today, some of the contracts and tenders are coming in even higher than what the most recent last year index was indicating. So it's different than the inflationary impacts on the operating costs, which are 2 or 3%. It is higher than that, recognizing that's the reality that you've been facing.
Thank you. Any other comments from members of the public who have signed in or would like to speak to this at this time? Councillor Oak, you had something.
Yeah, I guess it should be noted that part of our water increase is we're looking at 5% increase in the price of water as well from the Lake Huron water system. So that's not all from our infrastructure projects as well. There's outside sources. So the next few years we're at 4 or 5%, I believe, for water increases year over year coming from the Lake Huron water system, I believe.
Yeah, and good point through the mayor. We've also, with that, assumed that your new customers and the volume needed for them, obviously what you bill your customer at their meter, there's water loss in the system as well. And so you have to actually purchase more than what actually goes through each individual home or business's meter. There's fire protection and there's other things that happen. There's, flushing and things that happen and have to happen in the system. So you always have to purchase more at those increased rates than what the volumes that are billed are. And so the volumes that we've included for the rate are based on those billable volumes. But in the expenditure side, you're absolutely right. We've had to actually increase and purchase more water than what gets billed for those other things. And that's embedded in the rates as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any comments from the public? Oh, go ahead. Come on down, John. No, you gotta come down so we can hear you and have you on the record. Well, we do know who you are. If you could just identify yourself, that'd be great. Thanks. Put your microphone on, please.
I only have one simple question. I wonder,
State your name.
oh, John Mine Pinnacle Homes.
Go ahead.
I'm wondering if there's any provisions in the 10-year plan for notwithstanding the current grants, but the grants that could possibly be coming in the next 10 years. Does that again reflect on the current waste, water and water situation?
Nancy? Thanks, John.
Through the mayor. No, unless you have received notice that you're getting a grant or have applied for a grant that you're pretty much guaranteed you're going to be getting, and know about. We don't want to predict that you might get grant funding and set your rates at a level where if you don't get that grant funding, then there'd be a big spike in a given year because you don't get that money, or you'd have to potentially take the risk of not doing the capital work that's required. And as if it's because you don't have money available to do the infrastructure renewal, at least in life cycle, there's always that increased risk of failure that you need to take care of. So when we're looking at the rates over a 10-year forecast, we're trying to ensure that we're smoothing out those increases so that you don't have large fluctuations where, oh, well, we were assuming we get, $30 million in grants. We didn't get it. Now we have to bump the rates up, 20, 30, 50% sometimes without that. We always want to try and smooth it out. And again, if you are successful, and I know staff are always applying for everything they possibly can to try and help, but if you were to get something very large, there's nothing stopping you from going back and reducing those rates in future years through your budget process or through the next rate study. But as mentioned, you also have an infrastructure deficit through your asset management plan that you're not meeting. And so keeping the rates as predicted, if you do get some more grant funding, might actually help you catch up with that backlog of asset management where there is a higher risk, year after year of failure if those aren't being addressed. So it may or may not help it, but we don't want to predict grants that we aren't sure that may even be available to you, let alone that you'd be approved for them.
No, appreciate that. Thank you very much, Nancy. Are there any other questions from members of the public? Anyone online that you're aware of, Madam Clerk?
No, there are no members of the public online.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else from council members? Okay, we'll go to our next steps then. At this point, Ms. Masood Coulson.
Through the mayor, I think in Nancy's presentation, she had next steps there. Does council have any instructions for us at this time? And if not, we would be prepared to bring the revisions and everything back for meeting in March. I believe we were looking at the second meeting in March.
Okay,
I think that's what we were looking for, unless we get other instructions from council.
members of council, are there any comments or direction? Okay, you're not seeing any. Okay, we'll turn it back over to staff. Thank you.
That South Huron Council receives a water and wastewater rate study and financial plan presentation by Nancy Neal of Watson and Associates.
And a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Oak, second by Councillor Dietrich. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor, and that carries with 7. Thank you. So we'll go to our next item, the public meeting.
The South Huron Council adjourn at 5:50 p.m. for the purpose of a public meeting pursuant to the Development Charges Act.
And a mover for that, please. Moved by Councillor Dietrich, second by Councillor Oak. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor, and that carries with 7. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to that. So this public meeting is being called to order at 5:50 p.m. I would ask the clerk to advise of the purpose of the public meeting, please, Madam Clerk.
So tonight, council is holding a public meeting under Section 12 of the Development Charges Act 1997 as amended. The purpose of this meeting is to give the public an opportunity to ask questions, provide comments, and make representations on the 2026 Development Charges Background Study. The study calculates new development charges for the municipality of South Huron services.
Disclosure of pecuniary interests from the members of council. Are there any disclosures at this time? Not seeing any. Move on to the presentation. Prior to receiving the public comments, we will ask our consultant, Watson Associates Economists, limited to a brief presentation of the findings of the study. Welcome, Nancy, again.
Thanks. We'll wait till the presentation gets shared there. And if you can move to the next slide, that'd be great. So good evening. I am just going to walk you through a brief presentation of the findings of the background study. As noted, it is a mandatory public meeting that is required under the Development Charges Act. That's what we're here for tonight. Prior to your consideration of a new development charge bylaw, the background study needs to be available to the public for a minimum of 60 days, which is why we won't be considering passage of the bylaw tonight. The study was formally released on December 31st of 2025. There has been more than the minimum 2-week requirement to hold tonight's meeting from the time we released that study, and there was notice given in conjunction with the act for 3 weeks prior to this evening. We are here tonight to answer any questions from yourselves, to get input from the public, so that you can consider this bylaw in the weeks to come. Next slide. To give you a sort of a timeline of what we've been going through throughout 2025, we were working very closely with staff in a number of different departments where there was growth-related needs that we've embraced in the background study. Through that process, we did talk about policy issues for the bylaw that we'll talk about in the times to come, as well as the capital costs. Now, all of the costs that have been included in the background study are in 2025 dollars because that's the year in which the study was issued. So unlike the rate study, we don't project future inflated costs. Everything is costed in 2025 dollars, and that's to recognize that once you have a development charge rate in place, it annually gets updated and indexed for inflation based on that non-residential construction price index that the Act prescribes. And so with that adjustment every year for inflation to your rates, it will build in the inflation that you'll pay the inflated dollars for each of the projects when they come due and you're actually undertaking them. As noted, we released the background study December 31st. Tonight is our public meeting, and really we're looking at bylaw passage at the moment for March 16th with implementation on that date unless you as council choose to implement it at a later date. You have up to a year to pass the bylaw from the time that the background study is released. So at some point this year, you will have to consider a new bylaw. Next slide. So just to give a little bit of an overview, development charges are, the purpose of them is to recover capital costs that are associated with both residential and non-residential growth that are to take place. So these are incremental costs that are really only required to service growth. If there was no more growth, you wouldn't need these projects. They do not include any costs that would be funded for replacement. You will see in some of the projects that there is replacement and expansion. So you may be increasing or upsizing pipes, for example, from a 200 millimeter to a 400 millimeter. Well, there would be a deduction for a benefit to existing related to that asset replacement for the assets that is there today versus the incremental costs of upsizing that pipe. So anytime there's a replacement and expansion or upgrade, we do make a deduction to ensure that we're only embracing those capital costs that are associated with the incremental increase needed for growth. You are empowered to use the Development Charges Act to recover these costs as well. The costs that we include in here are considered costs that are the benefit of multiple developments and are not related to what we call local services. And you will see in the background study, there's an appendix that has a local service policy that sets out what the local developers are required to do, such as internal, if you think of a subdivision, internal roads and sidewalks and water and sewer mains, the smaller ones, as well as if they're dedicating land for parkland, the base level of condition that you want that dedicated to you at. None of the value or costs associated with those are in the development charges. It's really the higher order costs that we put in here that benefit more than any one specific development. Next slide. We have looked at two different growth forecast periods depending on the service. So for all services except for water and wastewater, we have looked at a 10-year forecast period that is late 2025 to late 34. In that time, there is a net population increase of just under 2,100 people anticipated. And a gross population in the new households of 2,171. The difference between that gross and net is we recognize that in the existing households over time, there tends to be a decline. So children grow up, they move out, they get their own homes. There's less people in each of those homes. Older people, unfortunately, pass away. And again, there's a reduction and a natural decline. So we always want to make sure we're only looking at the incremental for that net population that we need, but that will service the gross in those new population in those new households. What that translates into is just about 1,000 units in the 10-year forecast. And then for the non-residential side of things, we're looking at just over 550 additional employees, and they will be in various different industrial, commercial, institutional, or agricultural buildings that will generate almost 500,000 square feet of new building spaces. As I mentioned, we look at that 10-year forecast for all services except water, wastewater. With water and wastewater, we've looked out over a longer period for the full urban build out area that will receive those water and wastewater services. Because you have a servicing strategy that laid out a longer forecast of all the capital needs that are going to be required, we were able to embrace all of those costs and all of the growth that will benefit from that cost. So that those two services look out more than 10 years. What you will see in there is projects that aren't in your water wastewater rate study because we've only looked at 10 years for the water wastewater rate study. So there are more water and wastewater projects included in the DC calculations than what you see in your rate study. Next slide. The services that we're looking at, that we've looked at, that are charged on a municipal wide basis. So whether you're on water, wastewater, or services or not, you would pay the municipal wide services. They include services related to a highway, which is all your roads and related infrastructure, including facilities and fleet, your fire services, parks and recreation services, and then there's also a class of studies for growth-related studies that support the growth needs, as well as the development charge study itself is recovered. And then on that urban serviced area only, we impose the water wastewater charges. So if you're in the rural area and you're on a well and septic and you're never going to hook up to municipal services, you won't be paying those components of the charge. Next slide. In total, there is gross costs of over $121 million that have been identified. There are some services in fire that we recognize will benefit more than the 10 years that we've included in this growth forecast. And so you'll see just over $2.1 million that have been deducted as post-period benefit. Those are still growth-related costs, but will end up being embraced in future development charges when more growth is brought into those calculations for the homes and businesses that will benefit from those services. But you're not going to build half a fire station, for example. You're going to build a full one. It's just going to benefit more growth. There's a little bit of deduction for growth-related studies, recognizing that some of the studies will look at things that are related to services that are not development charge eligible, such as municipal parking needs that your official plan may speak about. As well, there are almost $33 million of deductions related to the benefit to existing, those calculations I was talking about. If you're replacing and upsizing or replacing and expanding, the replacement component has been deducted. Those costs have to be funded from other services. We've also embraced over $16.7 million in grant funding. And that leaves about $69.25 million that needs to be recovered from the development charges. Now, one of the things I want to note here, because you will not see under the wastewater category there, grant funding being deducted. You just got an announcement last week that you have received wastewater funding towards a couple of the projects that are in the DC. You will be getting an addendum report next week that will reflect that money coming in and will reduce the charges we've calculated in this report. We didn't have enough time to get all of that in place, have an addendum report issued before this evening, based on the timing of when we were notified that you got that. But we have done the calculations today, so I do know what the impact is going to be on the charges, and I'll get to that. But I just want to point that out because someone might be saying, what about the wastewater grant funding you just got? It's not on this table. So that's coming. Based on the rates that we calculated before that grant funding, next slide, the calculated rates are set out in this table. For the municipal-wide services, they range for a single-family home from $7,100 down to about $2,730 for $40 for special care units, which would be something like a retirement home or a long-term care facility, those institutional type units, group homes, that sort of thing, if they were to happen. And why there's different rates for different types of residential units is because we look at what the costs are associated with residential growth on a per capita basis, and then we multiply that per capita charge by average persons per unit that are in various types of homes. Low density being single and semi-detached tend to have higher persons per unit on average than a townhouse or an apartment unit. So that's why the charges are varied. It's very much based on historical data plus additional data we are projecting to come up with those average persons per unit. On the urban side of things, in addition to those municipal-wide charges, the water and wastewater services charges range from about $11,540 down to $4,450 per unit. So in total, if you're in the urban area, the charges would be ranging from $18,641 for a single family down to just over $2,800 for one of those special care units. As well, you impose charges for wind turbines for only a few services, though, those related to roads, fire, and a portion of studies. And they're really based on an equivalent of a single family rate for those services. All other non-residential, you will see a difference in this going forward. In the past, you've had an agricultural rate that has been a percentage of your other non-residential rates for industrial, commercial, and institutional. This time around, we calculated it differently. We recognized that the agricultural developments aren't on water and wastewater, they're on well and septic. So we've eliminated the charge for the water and wastewater component, but we've actually calculated that rate. So we've looked at the non-residential costs that are required to be recovered from that type of development, industrial, commercial, institutional, and what we call primary in the study, which is your agricultural. And we've looked at how much new employment is being anticipated in that agricultural sector versus the other sectors. And we've split the costs based on that and then divided those costs into the total square footage in the agricultural sector versus the other sector. And what that does is actually reduce the agricultural costs because it's based on a calculation versus an average percentage that you've done in the past. So it actually, in areas where most municipalities want to incentivize development in the agricultural community, it reduces the rate you'd impose there. For the other non-residential, industrial, commercial, institutional charges, those charges in the full urban area are just over almost $6.60 per square foot. Now, I did note that we reran the calculations today for recognizing the wastewater grant. And if you're on the wastewater service, what you'll be seeing next week is the rate for the single family home going down about $200 per unit. And on the non-residential ICI side, it would be going down about 9 cents per square foot to these charges. Next slide. Just giving you a comparison of where the rates were in 2025 versus where they were calculated. In the full urban area, you were at a charge of $6,206, going up to the $18,641 calculated rate, or it might be a couple $100 less than that, as noted. I do want to point out that the increases that are in there are significant for water more than any other service. And that's because you really weren't collecting much in the past. There wasn't, you were waiting for your servicing study to be done to identify all those capital needs. And so there really wasn't much in the way of expansion identified in the previous DC for water services. So that's one area that is increasing significantly with what's been identified in the most recent data. As well, because everything was in $2025, your current rates got inflated or indexed on January 1st this year from the 6,206 up to the 6,467. And so because you want to also embrace $26 when you pass your bylaw, you will be assuming that that 4.2% inflationary impact and considering rates of the 19,424 in those inflated dollars. On the non-residential side, again, you're going from $1.48 in the urban serviced area. Now the calculated rate is $6.59. Again, it's been inflated. You're now at $1.55 per square foot, and those calculated rates with the inflation of 4.2% would be $6.87. Next slide. Where you compare to other, and I know this is a small chart for anyone in the audience, a lot of numbers here, but where your current rates rank to other municipalities, development charge rates around you. Right now, you are in the blue line near the bottom in 19th place. The calculated rates would bring you up for a single family home to higher in the forecast period, but really what we are embracing in here isn't just your charges. In some municipalities, there are both upper and lower tier charges, as well as water, wastewater, depending on where you are, maybe at the upper tier, maybe at the lower tier, or maybe combined, and where the upper tier deals with the treatment and the lower tiers deal with the collection and distribution of it. So we've separated the water, wastewater components of those charges to really give you a sense of where you're going to fall in the new categories. Next slide with commercial. Again, we're showing where you are currently and where the calculated rates are on the pink line. So moving up in the ranking from 17th place to 8th place right now. Now, where some other municipalities are potentially in undertaking new DC studies, I don't know. So this is just based on their current rates that are in place right now. And then there's one more on the next slide that really is the industrial side of things. And why we've shown that separately is because there are some municipalities that discount or exempt their industrial development and don't impose the full calculated charges. So again, moving up the in the comparator list based on the calculated rates. And next slide. So as I mentioned, when we were undertaking the discussions with staff, we did have to make significant changes to the bylaw, the draft bylaw that's in the background study. And a lot of that is because of changes in the act that have taken place over the last 5 years since your last bylaw was put in place. There are a lot more mandatory or statutory exemptions and discounts that have been provided. We've embraced all of that, as well as definitions to ensure that it's clear as to who will get those exemptions or discounts. The industrial expansion exemption of up to 50% one time of what you had in place. So if you had a 10,000 square foot building, you could add 5,000 square feet and not pay the charge. That is not new. That's been in place for many years, as well as residential intensification. So if you want to expand your home, you're not charged the DC. And then if the county or school boards have DCs in place, if you're building, say, a new fire station or rec center, they're not going to impose their DC on you. But if they're building new buildings here in South Huron, you're not going to impose your DC on them as well. So those three top ones have been in place for quite some time. Over the last 5 or 6 years, there have been changes that have introduced other mandatory exemptions. They include additional residential units for up to 2 units in an existing or new home that are fully exempt. So you could build a new home and at the same time be putting in a legal basement apartment and say a garden or granny flat out back. You'd only be charging for the single family home. Those other 2 units would be exempt. Same thing for an existing home. They can come in and add those units without having to pay. Now, some municipalities allow more than 2 units as of right through their zoning. But anything more than 2 additional units, you could start charging for like a 3rd or 4th additional unit if that was allowed. In addition, there are affordable and attainable units are exempt. Now, the province has set out a bulletin that provides the threshold as to what is considered for ownership units or rental units, what affordable is. Anything below that is fully exempt from development charges. The developer would have to enter into an agreement with you for a minimum of, to ensure that the units stay affordable for a minimum of 25 years to get that exemption. The attainable units, although the Act speaks to them being exempt, we still are waiting for further regulation to be put in place to define what is attainable. Right now, it just says they're not affordable units and they're not rental units. We don't know what else they are. That could come in at any time during the life of this bylaw. And just like the other changes, if the Act changes, it overrides your bylaw and you'd have to provide those exemptions. Or if you ever pass an inclusionary zoning bylaw that sets out affordable units at a different threshold than what the province does, those would also be mandatorily exempt. Nonprofit housing and long-term care homes are mandatorily exempt. Any university that is for the purposes of learning or research, small or large campus, if that's built here, they are mandatorily exempt. That is something you will not find in the Development Charges Act. It was actually put in place through the Ministry of Training Colleges and Universities Act. So different way of getting the exemption, but they're fully exempt. And then if there is rental housing developments, based on the number of bedrooms in each unit, there's a discount. So any units that are rental that have 3 or more bedrooms get a 25% discount off the rate. If they're 2-bedroom units, they get a 20% discount, and 1-bedroom or bachelor units would get a 15% discount off the rate. In addition to that, there are the rate that gets imposed if you are proceeding through site plan or zoning amendment. Your rate is frozen at the day you apply for that application. And then based on when you get approval of that application, that rate is frozen for an amount of time. Depending on when you applied and when you got your approval, that could be 18 months to 2 years that rate is frozen at the application date. That plus interest is calculated at the time of building permit issuance. And if that rate versus the rate that's in place, you get the developer gets the lower of those two rates. So if I applied for a site plan a year ago and got approved for it 6 months ago, and my rate was frozen, that rate plus interest, I have 18 months to pull my building permit. And whatever rate is in place when I pull my building permit, if that is higher than my frozen rate at my application date plus interest, I pay the lower frozen rate. If the rate in place is lower, I pay that. So the developer gets the benefit of that lower of the two rates. But that means any developments proceeding through those applications really have to be tracked quite closely by staff. Installment payments are how the development charges get paid for any institutional developments or any rental housing. So where they used to pay at building permit issuance, they now pay in 6 equal installments, with the first installment due at the time of occupancy permit, not building permit issuance. So that again can be delayed for months before you get that revenue. And then every year for the next 5 years on the anniversary of that occupancy permit is when you get the next installment. As well, any other non-rental residential units, as of last summer, with the changes in the act, now pay at occupancy permit as well instead of at building permit issuance. So again, it helps the developers get the units in place, be closer to actually closing before they're paying that DC rate. Next slide. In addition to all of those statutory policies that we've built into your bylaw, you as a council also have the ability to fully or partially discount, exempt, or delay any types of development charges, as long as you do it for a class or a type of development and treat everyone in that class or type of development equally. Now, a class of development is industrial. A type of development would be a place of worship or a bona fide farm. So right now, what we have in the draft bylaw are full exemptions for the portion of a place of worship that is for worship. So that does not include any revenue generating private schools, faith-based schools, Montessori type schools, or banquet facilities they may want to also build on their property to help generate money. Those components would not be exempt. Farm buildings that are for bona fide farming purposes are exempt. And then any residential development creating or adding an accessory use or building, shed, storage facility, for example, a garage, swimming pools and pool houses for that sort of thing are fully exempt. And in addition to that, your bylaw has always recognized that there's a redevelopment or conversion credit. So if I'm knocking down my house and replacing it, as long as I do that within 5 years, you're not going to charge me a DC. If I'm knocking down my house and I have a really big property and I want to put up a row of 4 townhouses, well, you're going to impose the charges for 4 townhouses at that multiple rate less the charge for one single family home to recognize what was there. Same thing on non-residential. If I knock down a 5,000 square foot building and build a 10,000 square foot building, you're only going to charge me the incremental additional 5,000 square feet. Because we're recognizing what was already there and using things in the system currently. Any other policies you may want to consider is up to you. Again, full or partial exemptions for any type or class of development is up to you. In addition, recognizing that the rates are significantly increasing, it is up to you and at your discretion to impose all or a portion of those charges. You can phase them in. You could phase them in for residential, different than non-residential. That's up to you. What you do need to consider with any phase in or additional exemption is where you're making a clear conscious decision not to collect all of the charges. Obviously, when you go forward with these projects, you won't have all the money necessary, and therefore there would be an impact on your taxes for those, non-water wastewater services, or on your water and wastewater rates for those services. And so that may, from our earlier discussion tonight, increase what, provide additional increases needed to rates that you would need to consider in future years if you imposed like a phase in or any other exemptions. Next slide. So next steps, again, as I mentioned, we're here to get public comment and input, comments from yourself. Go back and refine the bylaw if needed. Again, we will be issuing that addendum report next week based on the latest and greatest information on those wastewater rate grants that were received. We are back here March 16th for your consideration of the bylaw, unless you want to delay that. Further, that again is up to you, but that's what we're scheduled for right now, with the effective date coming into effect immediately. Again, unless you decide that you can pass it March 16th, but you want to, give a grace period and not impose it until a specific later date, that's up to you as well, as long as it's passed before December 31st of the end of this year. Once you have passed it, there is a legislative requirement to provide notice within 20 days of passage, and there is an appeal period that is statutory within 40 days of passage of the bylaw. And then if there is no appeal within 60 days of the bylaw enforcement date, you have to have available a pamphlet that summarizes the rates and the policies, and that available on your website or at the counter where you're issuing permits. Last slide is any questions or comments that the public or yourselves have. I'd be happy to answer.
I appreciate that. And Madam Clerk, you want to advise about the written comments, please?
So everyone's aware, there were some written comments received from Perth Huron Builders Association and Maureen Cole following the publishing of the agenda. Those comments were circulated to council and uploaded to the minutes agendas page on southhuron.ca as additional documents for tonight's meeting.
So we'll go to council. Are there any comments from members of council at this time? Councilor Oak, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor. You note that there's some exemptions. Now the wording has changed in the exemptions from the last time. It was called ag building or structure, and now it's saying farm building or bona fide farm building. I guess, so what's the difference in the wording? And so in the charts as well, you've got 15 cents a square foot in here for a number, but if it's exempt, why is there a number there, I guess?
Through the mayor, great questions. Not all agricultural buildings are bona fide farm buildings. They're not barns or silos or specific. There can be on-farm diversified uses that are allowed through zoning, such as, a barn that's converted into a banquet facility for weddings and parties and stuff. That's not it's a barn, but it's not for bona fide farming purposes. It's in the agricultural area. They would be charged that 15 cents a square foot, where a true barn for bona fide farming purposes would not. And that's really the distinction. So it's those other types of businesses that can take place on agricultural land that's allowed through zoning that would be charged like any other business if it was in the urban serviced area.
Thank you, Councillor Oak.
So just to follow up on that then, so you mentioned barn silos, so what about a shed? For implement storage or whatever else, is that eligible? In the past, it has been exempt. And then I guess we have been trying to encourage on-farm diversification with businesses. So in that case, if they were to do some retail from their farmers market or something like that, you're saying at this point in time that would be DC chargeable?
Through the mayor, so a couple of things there. It it depends. First off, the storage, like a shed, that's still one of the discretionary exemptions you've provided. So you wouldn't be charging for a shed or a pool house for a pool kind of thing to keep the pump and stuff in that. That is part of the exemptions. When it comes to the on-farm diversified uses, there is a lot happening out there throughout the province. It differs from community to community. There's even things like cannabis production facilities happening on agricultural land that are big business. And so most municipalities in recent years have been trying to scope down what they're actually giving as an exemption to really focus in on farming and not all of those others. Now, if someone has a stand at the end of their driveway where they sell the vegetables they grow on their farm, most municipalities aren't imposing a charge on that, but there are on agricultural land large retail spaces sometimes associated with big farm operations. I know where I live, there's a couple of farms that actually they have full stores, retail stores, and other buildings where you can book kids' birthday parties and other type of banquet facilities. Those are, big revenue generators for the farm. Again, a lot of municipalities are saying that that's not what we're looking to exempt. Because if they were in town, you'd be charging them. But entirely up to you. You can, that's where I say this is a made in South Huron bylaw. What we've drafted in here, you have the ability to make any refinements to that up to and including the night that you pass the bylaw. So if you want to fully exempt all non-residential agricultural building, whether it's on-farm diversified uses or for bona fide farming purposes, that's up to you. And that change can be made in the bylaw before you pass it.
Thank you, Nancy. Any other questions? Councillor Vaughn, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. That was a lot to digest for sure. On page 12 of your presentation, you had a box, a grid there talking about mandatory policies and rate freezes relating to site plan rezoning applications. So my question is really about I think it's about implementation of these rates. So suppose we've gone ahead and approved a bylaw with an increase in rates. What I'm trying to understand is we have a number of subdivisions throughout South Huron that have applied for their subdivision, and they're in various stages of whether they have a site plan agreement or not. Some are totally approved, some are not, some are in phases, phase 1, phase 2. And I'm trying to understand when these rates actually apply. And I'm confused because there's a lot of terminology here and it's just not aligning for me.
Through the mayor, you're not alone. This is probably one of the most confusing things they've put in the act for both the public and development community and staff and counselors to understand. A subdivision on itself, if it hasn't proceeded through site plan or rezoning applications, this doesn't apply. They pay the rate in effect when they pull their permit or at occupancy, depending on the type of development it is. If it has gone through site plan or rezoning application, there's 3 different time periods. If they applied prior to January 1st of 2020, these rules don't apply to them. They pay the rate in effect when they come for their permit or building permit or occupancy. Okay. However, from January 1st, 2020 onward, if I had come in and applied for a building permit or a site plan application, for example, on January 1st, 2020, and if I got approval of that from staff and yourselves prior to June 5th of 2024, and let's say I got my approval on June 4th, 2024, I would have 2 years from that date. So up to June 4th of this year to pull my building permit. On June 4th of this year, staff would say, okay, the rate that was in place on January 1st, 2020, when you applied for this, was $10. The rate on June 4th of 2026 is $20. $10 plus interest accrued up to that point, let's say that's $16. The $16 is lower than the $20 that's in effect when I pull my building permit, so I pay the $16, not the $20. Does that help?
It helps. It talks about some staggering. What I'm still not clear on though is that's an awful lot again of information to
I
write
know.
down dates and times and if this, if that. Is that actually somewhere in this big Bible?
Sure is, and it's in the Development Charges Act.
Okay. Okay.
So if you look at, let me just find the section for you. There is a whole legislative section in Chapter 1 that speaks to it. It's also, let me just find it with your rate freeze. Give me a second.
Sure.
So in section 1374 on page 114, it talks about Bill 108, which actually reduced the 2-year period to 18 months for that frozen rate for any applications that were approved on or after June 5th. So where I talked about the 2-year period, if my approval of that application didn't take place until June 5th, 2024 or later, the 2-year period is shrunk to 18 months. That was that change. And then the most recent, I'm just going back to find the original where it was introduced. And then one of the change last year that took place, which is in a future section, is where they introduced that it's now the lower of the rate in effect or that frozen rate plus interest. And that is on page 116, section 1387, where they introduced the lower charge through Bill 17. Just let me find the original implementation of it because it was introduced and it's been changed twice since those rules. It may have actually taken place since your last bylaw was put in. It may have been in place when your last bylaw was passed and wouldn't be summarized here then. I'll have to get back to you on when it was originally put in place in December of 2020 or 2019 for January 1st, 2020. So it was already applicable in your last bylaw. So I haven't summarized it here. But there has been those two changes since, to shrink the timeline and then to introduce the lower of the two. So it is, again, it's one of the areas, it's the most confusing to figure out because you have to follow a timeline and track every application for site plan or rezoning. Now, if I came in for a rezoning application, got my approval, my rate would be frozen. And then I came in for a site plan, the rate would be refrozen at the later application or that site plan versus the rezoning. So it resets it even if there's both types of applications. So again, it's something administratively for the municipality to have to be tracking and determining what the right rate is to actually impose. The interest, there's a maximum interest rate that you can impose on that rate freeze, which is based on the average of the 5 big banks prime rate plus 1%. So that is prescribed. Prior to a change in the legislation, municipalities could set any interest rate they wanted to. Some set it very high, some set it reasonable, some set it low. That forced the province to come in and prescribe it.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. Any other questions from members of council? Councillor Vaughan, follow up?
Not a follow-up on that one, because I have some more reading to go back and do. But I have another one, which basically has to do with, there was a grid earlier on, I'm not sure what page that was on, but maybe you'll recall it. Talked about water, wastewater services, and it had in there a terminology that said 2025 to urban build out. And the figure that stood out for me was there was a $72 million figure. And so my first smallish question is around what did you mean by urban build out? You might have said it, but it went past me.
Through the mayor. If you look on slide 4, you will see the urban serviced area growth forecast. So right now, and Mike can jump in here, your water and wastewater servicing strategy looked at providing services to lands that are eligible to be developed in the entire municipality's water and wastewater serviced area. So not the rural area, but anyone that will eventually hook into that service. And so because your servicing strategy identified all the projects, and Dawn might be able to fill that into, there's no specific date or year that that's projected at. Depending on the take up of growth, building out all the potential development lands that can hook into the municipal services or that would be required to if developed, that can happen in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. It really depends on the amount of take up of growth. And that's why we just call it the urban build out boundary. We don't try and tie it to a specific year. We know what would be needed if all the lands were developed. And that's the costs that have been included divided by all that growth that could go in. And you'll see on slide 4, where in the first 10 years, we're looking at just over 1,000 units. That full urban build out would allow for almost 5,600 units. So it's a much longer period of growth. But again, could come very quickly, could come very slowly, depending on how fast the development community develops and people, move and buy homes in South Huron. So the costing then that you're talking about, the gross cost of 72 million is on slide 6. And that's where there has been all of those capital costs have been identified in your servicing strategy equal just over $72.2 million. But of that, we recognize that some of the existing pipes are going to be replaced and upsized to allow more flows through it to service growth. And we've deducted 22.5 million almost from that. So it's really the net of 49.7 million that's included in the calculations for the wastewater service. And that's what's going to reduce with the grant funding that you've received towards a couple of those growth-related projects in the addendum report next week.
And follow up, and then maybe go to someone else or to the public here. But go ahead, Councillor Bond.
I do have a follow-up
Yeah.
directly related to that. Okay. In the water wastewater study that we were looking at, we were basically talking about how this is going to impact existing, like the rates there would impact existing residences, existing commercial customers and so on. Whereas this is really more on a new development kind of perspective lens that we're looking at. Okay. And so this 72 million is like the high gross number for if we had full build out, is what I think I'm hearing you say.
Yeah.
Okay. So not adjusted for grants and a much longer time horizon. So you were making it clear that council had opportunity to make decisions on differing levels of rate. So I'm wondering here, like by and large, the wastewater is the biggest number that is standing out here. And I'm assuming that that is a big driver for why we went from like in the residential 6,000 to 18,000 approximately. So if we do, some municipalities look at it from the perspective of, just like we did with the wastewater study, we were looking at a 10-year period. Do some look at it from the perspective of a 10-year period when they're looking at DCs?
Through the mayor, some do. Most don't when it comes to water wastewater services, for a couple of reasons. Typically, some of the very large projects, especially when you're talking about treatment plant expansions, can take 5, 6, 7 years to even get from start to finish in place, and services much more growth than what would be embraced in a 10-year forecast period. And if you wanted to try and scope those types of larger projects down and phase them by doing a smaller expansion and then do additional expansions, in the end, they tend to cost more versus looking at providing, like we know what would be needed for the full costs of servicing all the development related to those expansionary works. And therefore, you can embrace and smooth out the costs over a longer period of time by doing that. And so where again, you're scoping projects down, you're not going to replace a 200 millimeter pipe with a 300 millimeter and then 12 years out, replace it again with, a 400 millimeter pipe. You're better off going from the 200 to the 400 millimeter now because, and collecting that over time from more growth, because if you replace it a second time, you're replacing something that should last 80 to 100 years after 10 or 12 years. And the replacement cost becomes benefit to existing deductions in that future development charge study. So it costs your ratepayers more. So most municipalities, when it comes to water and wastewater, look out over longer periods of time if their master plans or strategies have already identified all those growth needs. And it does tend to, like I say, over that longer period, keep the costs down, both for the development community as well as the existing water wastewater customers and those future water wastewater customers that will start paying rates as well. I wouldn't want to buy a new home now in any municipality, pay a development charge of say 18,000, and then 10 years later, the pipes that were put in place are being ripped out for more development, and now I'm paying for that pipe again through my water wastewater rates when it didn't get its full useful life and has to be replaced just to upsize it for more growth. That isn't the best planning for services that it cost as much as water and wastewater do.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay,
Nope.
thank you, Councillor. Any other comments at this time from members of council before I go to the public? Okay. So at this time, members of the public may ask questions and provide comments. If any members of the public are interested in providing comments, please come up to the microphone and please state your name and address for the municipal record. Mr. DeJong, you still have to state your name and address, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Once more, Don DeJong, Trident Properties. Thank you for engaging us tonight. A lot of information. Nancy, thank you for your presentation. Some things I was really listening to because there's a lot of facts last week that I was struggling with. And even today I struggle with. And maybe to take a step back one more, again, I remind us I'm here on our behalf, but I also am conscious of PHBA's concern. And I'll just speak to that first before I speak to our individual concern. I think PHBA as an association, and you see it in the correspondence, maybe didn't have the opportunity for communication as much here as they have in other jurisdictions. So I just state that as openly. I don't know what happened, and it's a tough moment right now. You know, you have Christmas, you have trips in January, you have time, and here we are February. But I can assure you that the association has stated they haven't had time to give input. And that's something surprising right now for us to be with, because I think the collaborative nature that's happened with the association and the municipality has been very good, and staff have been excellent to engage in sessions. We're with community liaison work that's happened in Huron County recently. But I just say that on behalf of the association. It's important because we're moving through this very quickly, and there's concern from the association for that. Moving to Trident and our own reference here. Again, a lot of information. I do ask council to indulge me for a moment in a few memories here. You know that in our development in South Huron, we started many years back. We went through quite an ordeal with timing. At one point, we were with, certain costs being associated with sewer. Other points we weren't. We stepped up to the plate and did costs to save issue, I'll just say. So when I hear Nancy, if I may be so informal, speak about area-wide charge, I go, gee, does that seem reasonable? Like, I don't know if that seems reasonable with what we did as a developer and having to pay for our sanitary line. And we're also with the localized bylaw that is $4,800 on each unit that I don't believe, and I'm not expecting the good people in Exeter to be paying. That's a localized charge. And we're with some background that states there are localized charges in the municipality already. So I'm very concerned when I hear of blanket wide charges. And that's what I'm seeing in that DC right now. And again, it doesn't feel right that we and what we're aiming to do, having prepaid the sewer extension, would now be paying for services outside of our area that we have no connection to. We've put our money into the ground. Now we're putting money into the ground for other development. And it's not, I don't think it's reasonable. And I hope council can see that, because this is something we obliged, and worked with council on in doing the services. I don't think it's where we choose to be. And I ask council to go a little slower on the process right now. From our personal point of view and the association, we did speak to an economist today on our behalf. I will say we'd like to give you input and ways to look at this to be fair. And I 100% agree with Nancy in being safe and fair in this process. You need to be, all of us have to be, but it's going too quickly to get the input that needs to be given to this and have it be proper, if I may be so bold. Now, you know, there are ways to look at this in 10 years' time, Councillor Oak, and I agree with you on that statement. And reserves, yes, but there's ways to look at the infrastructure. And when more development comes into play, you're going to be adjusting these again, and you're going to be averaging this out. I'm really pleased to hear from Nancy that they are with a horizon of services compared to the absorption that we're with. That was a concern that I had before, and Nancy's answered it. So that's positive. But we do have some important input to give you, and we ask for that to be, you know, heard at the right moment. We're just putting it together now. So in brief, we're going to have something written come more at the right moment, but I just want to give you those points of view tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. And Nancy, any idea about timelines that he's referring to perhaps? And you're welcome to sit at the table right here. You don't have to go to the podium. And Don, you can just stay by the podium if you have another question there. Feel free.
That's great. It's through you, Mayor Finch. Again, we had scheduled the March 16th consideration of the bylaw. Just to, you know, keep things going, it is at least 60 days after the release of the background study to meet the requirements. But again, it is up to you as council if you want to engage in more conversations and delay the process so that it can be considered. You know, comments from the public more. You could phase in the charges to give people time to react with their pro formas and what they're selling. There is a multitude of timelines. What you do have to do is make sure that you have a new bylaw passed before December 31st of this year, or you would have to undertake another whole update to the background study, and that's the last thing you want to do. But again, it's up to you if you want to the March 16th date, or if you want to move that to allow for more conversations and discussions with the community. That's entirely up to you.
Thank you very much for your input. Don, do you have a follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just a follow-up in words not spoken, but certainly the impact of Nancy's words now are important because I didn't share that comment. The buyers that we're with right now are not instant. And we're with sometimes people having homes for sale, sometimes people taking a long time to make a decision. It may not seem like a lot of money on a home, but margins are very tight right now for the builders. And we're not with a large margin the way it was 4 years ago. And the costs that are there are you know, $12,000 is a noticeable cost increase. And we're trying to do the best job possible for our buyers. And it's not as it was 4 or 5 years ago. So certainly that consciousness from the municipality and council now is important. Please.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to come forward and speak at this time? Mr. Minen, come on down. And although we do know you, please state your name and address, please.
I'm John Minen, president of Pinnacle Quality Homes. I live here in Exeter on Rowe Avenue. Going to that, I might just add, I actually bought a house for my own company because I wanted it in my own name, and I got over $100,000 in taxes, and that's got nothing to do with you folks. But, you know, I want to go back to, you know, I'm going to take my subdivision. I don't know if you're familiar with South Point. Okay. Millions of dollars in the ground. And in 2025, we sold 6 units. And I know the perception out there, builders are rich and builders are wealthy. Well, I can tell you one thing for certain. 6 units does not cover the cost of what I've done out there. We are in a tough situation. Building costs are going up. We have reduced our prices on our townhouses, of which if this goes through, we're going to have to put them back up again. And you want to talk about affordability with our young people in our community that want to build or own. It's getting to the point where it's impossible. And I know you've done a 10-year plan, but you know, DC's come up every 5 years. Maybe we should look at that. And another thing, you know, some of the services, might be wants instead of needs. And I understand when you live in a community, you want nice things. But I think we have to be very, very concerned about stifling our own local economy. Um, you know, we're also planning a condo project in town here. We have a base figure in our mind, and that base figure is affordable. But if we keep going down that road of what we're going, nothing is affordable. People can't afford it. People can't buy. And I realized that when I bought my own house for my own company. It was unbelievable. And that's when I said, you know, it's impossible to buy. And if you look at my subdivision in South Point, 6 units, I'm sitting on 35 to 40 serviced lots, serviced, ready to work on. If you think that was cheap, think again. So I'm appealing to council to let's revisit this somewhat in some way, shape, or form. That I'm the boots on the ground guy. Maybe a lot of people don't see it, but let's revisit this in some way, shape, or form. I understand, you know, growth needs to pay for growth. I get that. And in a lot of cases, developers pay for growth. So I'm just appealing to council that we could revisit it and see where we can, I'm not saying zero increase. I'm saying a 300% increase in the middle of a recession is not cool. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Any other comments from members of the public that'd like to present at this time? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you, though, those that comment. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody online that would like to comment?
There are no members of the public currently online.
Thank you. We'll go back to council. Any comments from members of council that'd like to say anything? Councillor McLeod Haggett, go ahead, please.
Through Mayor Finch. So just kind of going off of what you had said, Mr. Minot, is if we actually go around South Huron and we see all of the new pipes that have been in the ground, the projects that are potentially happening, I agree with you. We have to be very mindful on the increases that we're doing. Like you said, there is no young person that can afford to buy a house. And they would love to buy a house rather than renting. Rent is astronomical. They're never going to get ahead. So I think that we do have to review what has been presented to us and see where we can play with the numbers somehow to make this more efficient and affordable, not only for us, because, you know, we have to bring the money in where we have to keep the municipality running. But if it's completely unaffordable for you builders, nothing's happening. So we're getting no money in for anything that we have to do. So I just ask that council too, that we look at this in a much broader scope to see what we can maybe push out, where we can make some cuts. Like you said, we're in a recession. We have some serious financial strains on our residents. So I think as a whole, we have to sit and figure out where and what and how we can do, not only for us, but for the builders and for the families that are looking to buy here. Because if you look on the market, there's a lot of empty houses that people are not buying right now. Real estate has dropped. So even for builders, I know for my husband, he builds houses. It's slow because people are not buying because they can't afford the extra fees and everything on top of what their mortgages and stuff would be. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Oak.
Thank you, Mayor. And I echo some of the comments that have just been said here, going from 6,000 to 18,000 without knowing what else is going on in the area, right? I don't want to be a race to the top here. And we don't know what some of the other DCs are coming out with, some of our neighbors or whatever. And it's obviously, you know, it's a competitive market, or we have to be competitive to attract people to move to South Huron as well. And we can't price ourselves out of that as well. So Yeah, maybe March 16th isn't going to be the date in my mind. So we might have to relook at some of the numbers.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments at this time from members of council? Any other comments from the public? Okay, thank you. Council would urge the public to submit their comments in writing prior to noon on March 10th for inclusion in the March 16th, 2026 council agenda package. As council consideration of the development charges bylaw is scheduled to occur at the March 16th, 2026 council meeting. Madam Clerk, comments? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That was the original script. Should council want to extend, I guess we need some kind of a direction right now. Does council want us to come back with options, following further discussion, or timeline for, more consultation? Or does council want us to bring back options such as, phased in approaches? Or does council want to meet again to discuss the projects?
Members of council. Council Oak.
I guess I'd like to see some options for sure, but I also think it warrants another meeting, a committee of the whole or something to discuss it a little. This is the first time we've seen the study, right? So I'm not ready to rubber stamp it by any means. So.
Okay, Deputy.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with Councillor Oak. I think like this is a large increase. And for us to just rubber stamp it, I think we need to have, I would like to see something come back from staff with different options and have another meeting on this, because to me, this is a lot of dollars for the builders, and we need the builders. So thank you.
And we certainly have time on our hands at this point. So any other comments at this time? Councillor Vaughn, you had something? Go ahead. Let's see.
Yeah, I do. I'm just trying to think of the best way to say it. I'm not even sure that I'm convinced that we should be asking staff to go away and come up with options at this point. I actually think that what's really needed right now is to go through this study amongst ourselves, because this was the first time. There are concerns. I'm not even sure if everybody's on side with the phased in approach. And I would hate to send staff down a path to come back with, read our minds and come back with some options. I don't think that's fair to staff. I like the idea that the mayor read in that script, that encouraging the public to get back to us by a certain date and time. I like that idea. I think that will help us in sort of our discussion and decision making. So I'm for deferring it out a bit, but I'm also for having an opportunity as council to get together and have a conversation, perhaps after that March 10 deadline, or maybe that's not even the appropriate date for feedback from the public. So that's what I'm thinking.
So I'm sensing we want to make a resolution here of some kind or a recommendation. Councillor Oak.
I would suggest that the March 16th meeting that we were going to have, maybe that would be the meeting that council meets to discuss this further. We've already got a date set.
Go ahead.
Through the chair, so the March 16th meeting is a regular meeting of council, the second meeting in March.
Through the mayor, we can send a doodle poll out for a date in, later in March, early April, to set up a committee of the whole or a workshop or something to have further discussion on this, and then give a deadline for the public. We'll probably maybe use the March 16th date so they can provide it, and we can go from there.
Okay, so for the members of the public that are interested, please ensure you get your comments into our staff as soon as possible by that March 16th date. If you could, that'd be great. Any other comments from council at this time? Okay, not seeing as we'll wait for the doodle poll to come out and then we'll go from there. Very well. Thank you everyone for participating this evening. That's excellent. And Sue Carlson.
The South Huron Council hereby closes public meeting regarding the development charges background study at 7:05 PM.
And a mover, please. Moved by Councilor McLeod Haggett, seconded by Councilor Dietrich. Any discussion? Call a question, all in favor, and that carries with 7. Thank you. There's no closed session, no report from closed session. Ms. Sue Carlson.
The South Huron Council hereby adjourned at 7:05 PM.
Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councilor Neeb. Thank you. And no discussion. Call the question, all in favor. That carries with 7. Thank you. And thank you everyone again for attending.